Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Zeke-ollege Football. I am excited to bring you this discussion on the Sunbelt. But first, we have our first ever special guest on the show. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Pleased to be here. Chris Cooke, freshman transfer from Quinnipiac University. I'm excited to hop in today's podcast.
So, yeah, we're going to be going through our previews and predictions for the Sunbelt Conference today. Sunbelt, one of those conferences that doesn't get the same sort of respect historically as even some of the smaller group of five conferences. They've never had a New Year's Six candidate come from the Sunbelt, but they historically produce some pretty solid teams and teams that people have heard of as well. So we're going to go through team by team and break down each team in the first half of the show, and then we'll get into the predictions for who we think is going to eventually represent each team out of the Sun Belt and each division. So one interesting thing to note about the Sun Belt, they're one of the few conferences that still has set divisions for their conference title game. So there still is a Sun Belt East and a Sun Belt West. I think they might be one of the only conferences that still has that left alongside. I believe the SEC still does as well.
Mostly due to all the expansions. We see the Big Ten.
Yeah. So a lot of teams, like a lot of conferences with the expansions, with everything. We're looking at, a different slate than we had before. Again, one of the reasons why I started this show this year, 2024, it's almost like a completely new slate of college football. Everything is starting over, starting new.
Revolutionary.
Exactly. Revolutionary. And we're excited to talk about the Sun Belt. So let's start off by talking about the champions of the Sun Belt last year, the Troy Trojans. So Troy, they went 11-3 last year. They beat Appalachian State in the conference title game, but they're a new-looking team. They have a change at head coach. John Summerall decided to leave Troy and become the head coach of Tulane. But even though they have some differences, they still have some consistent pieces, specifically running back Kamani Vidal, the leading rusher out of the Sun Belt last year. He's returning back at running back for Troy. Now, quarterback situation is also going to be different. They had Gunnar Watson last year. He graduated. So now it appears that their starter is going to be someone by the name of Goose Crowder. He got a little bit of playing time last year. Had about maybe 3 throws at the end of a game.
That's a football name if I ever heard one.
Exactly. So exactly, Goose Crowder and stuff like that. They're actually a really surprising amount of fun names. Especially when you're looking through and doing a team preview, you find some goofy names.
Yeah, some gems.
Just last week, actually, when I was previewing the MAC, there's a wide receiver for Western Michigan named Bugs Mortimer. Yeah, that's a football name.
That's a football name,
Bugs
right there.
Mortimer, hell yeah. But so no John Summerall at head coach. But it is year number 1 for Jared Parker. So hopefully, with the consistent run game and relative consistency on defense and wide receiver, hopefully Troy can continue their winning ways. We're going to move forward. And Chris, would you like to touch on James Madison?
Yeah, James Madison is one of those teams that I'm very excited for in the Sun Belt this year. Grabbing Bob Chesney from Holy Cross, formerly Salve Regina Rhode Island roots. My twin cousins played football for Bob Chesney, and they said that one of his biggest strengths is just pushing you to your limits. And I think this team is going to skyrocket this year.
I was going to say Chesney did fantastic during his time at Holy Cross.
Right.
consistently led them to winning records and
Right.
FCS playoff appearances. So he's definitely a great get for them at James
Championship
Madison.
just a few years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Huge, great potential there at JMU. Uh, Although they do have some changes uh, for a lot of their position players. A lot of players entered the transfer portal to follow Kurt Signetti, their former coach. So a huge sort of mass exodus, if you will,
Right.
from James Madison to Indiana.
I think the good thing about James Madison is they left the conference on the right foot last year. They would have been right in the conversation for the Sunbelt title, but unfortunately they were under those 2 years of transfer period into the FBS. So I look forward to seeing what they can do this year.
Yeah, and I was going to say James Madison, this year is their first year that they can actually compete
Eligibility.
in a conference title. They're the first year that they're eligible for it. And they do have a talented quarterback coming in, Dylan Morris. You might recognize him. He played for Washington. Saw some time there in relief of Michael Penix Jr. But uh, certainly a
Yeah.
team to look out for.
Good transfer right there. I mean, that sitting behind Michael Penix Jr. tells you something.
Yeah,
So,
and now Will Rogers over at Washington. So Morris, seeing that he probably would not get much playing time, decides to transfer to James Madison, a place where he can absolutely prove himself
drive.
and thrive. Keeping with sort of powerhouses in the Sun Belt, let's talk about the runners-up last year, Appalachian State. Now it's year 5 for Sean Clark. He went 9-5 last year with a win in the Cure Bowl over Miami of Ohio. If you watched that game, it was a very, very sloppy game. It was downpouring
Right.
in Florida at the time. I think there was a bowl game record 13 fumbles in that game. They're just slipping all over the place. But it was a really fun game to watch. A lot of talent back on this team. Joey Aguilar is back at quarterback. The biggest sort of difference between this year's team and last year's team is the departure of their running back, Nate Noel. He's transferring over to Missouri to fill the role of Cody Schrader. So Kanye Roberts is going to have to step up. Another, fun name. Kanye Roberts going to have to step up. And I'm very high on App State. I think they have a lot of talent. I think Aguilar has already developed, and you've seen, from the start of the season to the end of the season that he's gotten better. So I think that they're certainly a team to look out for in the East, and they can absolutely make a run.
I feel the biggest thing to look at for App State is in that championship game wasn't perfect. There was a lot of turnovers, but showing that resilience down the stretch. It's not going to be your best game. You're going to have turnovers, but in the end, they came out on top.
Yeah, so one of those things to look out for, certainly, in the East. Speaking of the East, would you like to touch on Georgia Southern for us?
Yeah, so Georgia Southern, 3-5 in the conference last year, but 6-7 overall, right outside the 500 range. Not the best start, but I think they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, they had Davis Brin at quarterback, former Tulsa quarterback last year. He graduated, has no years of eligibility left. So they brought in Dexter Williams, an Indiana transfer. Now, the real question right now is back-to-back 6 and 7 years for Clay Helton, former USC coach, before he got fired in 2021. So can he reach a bowl game for the 3rd year in a row? And on top of that, can he actually win a bowl game at Georgia Southern? He hasn't been able to do it yet. 2 times he's gone to a bowl game, and he's lost in both. Now, we're going to move forward and talk about Marshall. So it's year 4 for Charles Huff. They went 6-7 last year, lost in the Frisco Bowl to UTSA, and they have a big transfer portal haul that came in for Marshall. So a lot of talent coming in, but also a lot of talent was leaving as well. And it looks like the quarterback competition there will be between Mitch Griffiths, who was the starter last year for Wake Forest, and Cole Pennington, son of Chad Pennington, and the starter in that bowl game against UTSA.
Good bloodline right there.
Yeah, actually, that Frisco Bowl last year had a quarterback battle of Cole Pennington versus Owen McCown, Josh McCown's son.
Yeah.
So it's two NFL quarterback caliber.
Shades of the old with the new.
Exactly. I was like, oh, okay, gosh, I feel old. So we're gonna move forward, talk about Old Dominion. It's year 4 for Ricky Ronnie. 6-7 last year, with a crushing bowl game loss in the famous Toastery Bowl. It was a huge come from behind victory for Western Kentucky. They led by, I believe, 28 points at one point and lost the game. So just a heartbreaking loss there for Old Dominion. Grant Wilson's back at quarterback. They did lose their top rusher, Kadarius Callaway, to the portal. Overall, they didn't bring in a lot of people, and some significant losses there. So Old Dominion might be one that takes a step back here in year 4 for Ronnie. Would you like to touch on Arkansas State for us?
Yeah, Arkansas State 4-4 in the conference, much like Georgia Southern, 6-7 overall. They finished middle of the pack in the West last year. I do believe that they missed some pieces going into this year, but definitely another team that is going to stay middle of the pack, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to be a team that's going to flourish to the top like Troy or James Madison, but we'll see what they can do.
Yeah, it's year 4 for Butch Jones. They started off the season looking horrible. They got destroyed by Oklahoma. I think it was 73-7 to start off the year. Actually, no, I don't think they got 7. I think it was 73-0.
Yeah.
So either way, the worst possible start of the season you could ask for Arkansas State. But they rebounded. They were able to make a bowl game. They did lose that bowl game, but the incumbent starter, Jalen Rayner, is going to be competing with former Texas State quarterback Malik Hornsby. So, it's going to be a similar question that we asked about Clay Helton. You're reaching bowl games, but can you finally get over that hump and win a bowl game? And that's really what it comes down for Butch Jones here.
That's the biggest thing for me with Arkansas State is having a really sloppy start to the year, kind of rebounding and then losing that bowl game. Losing that bowl game hurts, but they're going to learn a lot from that loss, and I feel like it's going to translate to this year.
Yeah, I mean, fighting through adversity, when you're winning, it doesn't show what kind of a team you are. It's when you're losing and how you adapt to that shows that. Just moving down the line, University of Louisiana. So again, back-to-back 6-7 seasons for Michael Desormeaux. Chandler Fields, most likely the starter. Their best quarterback last year, Zion Chris, transferred out. He's going to be playing for the Houston Cougars of the Big 12 next year. And more importantly than that, not a lot of improvement in the transfer portal. You saw big losses, but not a lot of people coming in. Now, granted, it's still early on. We just dealt with the fall and winter transfer portals. The spring transfer portal, right around the time of the spring games, has not happened yet. So still plenty of time. No need to panic yet. But in terms of the preview, as of right now, not a lot there in the transfer portal haul. Let's talk about Georgia State for a little bit.
Georgia State, definitely a team that has an experienced coach, Del McGee. He was part of the back-to-back national championship run as the running back game coordinator for the Georgia Bulldogs. So bringing him into their organization is definitely a step in the right direction for a team that did struggle last year, fifth in the East, 3-5 in the conference, 7-6 overall. So good to see them over 500. But I would say they're going to push in the right direction.
So it's interesting to note that their former head coach, the head coach last year, Sean Elliott, he left for South Carolina, but not a head coaching job, not even a coordinator job. He left to be their tight end coach. And that sort of it paints a picture about what the sport is sort of becoming. I try to be a very positive individual, but when I see stories like this, it makes it hard to, especially as someone who enjoys and loves Group of Five football as well. The fact that a head coach at a Group of Five program is making less than even a position coach at a Power Five program, it sort of shows that the priorities of the sport is mostly money, and it's not really about putting the best product out on the field. So this is not a slight against Sean Elliott in the slightest. Do what you need to do. Do what's best for yourself, your family. It's more of a slight about how the sport's been sort of organized or the lack of organization, so that all the Group of Five programs, especially in the new NIL era, are struggling to compete.
The biggest thing for me is how the NCAA is becoming kind of like a powerhouse organization, and you see the expansion of the Big Ten. Supposed to be 10 teams, was 14. Now we're going to go to 18. It kind of seems like there's going to be a generalization of almost the NFL and the AFC and the NFC, and they're just going to power it out from there. We see the expansion in the college football playoffs, but I wouldn't be surprised 10, 15 years down the line if it just comes down to the big powerhouse, SEC, Big Ten, just all competing and kind of branching off from all the other smaller conferences.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily surprised by a lot of these changes. You look at conference realignment, and it's mostly monetarily based. But just to get back into the actual teams, for like Georgia State, their actual team, you have Devin Granger returning at quarterback, but they did lose their starting running back, Marcus Carroll, to University of Missouri. Missouri picked up two Sunbelt running backs to sort of replace the void of Cody Schrader. And then they also got C.J. Mosley from Coastal Carolina. He transferred over in conference transfer, coming over to replace Carroll there. Coming up next, we have ULM. ULM did not have a good year last year. They went 2-10, and they are one of two Sunbelt teams to not be in a bowl game. Only two teams in the Sunbelt didn't make a bowl game last year. A lot of parity there. But their head coach, Terry Bowden, son of Bobby Bowden, he is out at head coach. It's year one for Brian Vincent. And then Aiden Armenta versus Blake Murphy for the quarterback role. Sorry, ULM fans out there. I'm not very high on ULM. They just don't really have the talent here. Maybe if Bryant Vincent can sort of get some high-profile recruits, maybe some 3 stars, 4 stars, to commit to their program, then the outlook will be a little better. But as of right now, ULM most likely going to be a bit of a bottom dweller. Speaking of bottom dwellers, Southern Miss. So Will Hall in year 4, they went 3-9 last year, and there are rumors that Hall was going to get fired in the offseason. He did not, so he's sticking around. But their biggest asset on the entire team, Frank Gore Jr., again, do you feel old yet?
Yeah.
Frank Gore Jr. He left early for the NFL draft. So they need Rodriguez Clark and Kenyon Clay to sort of step up and fill that role at running back. They do have some consistency at the quarterback position. Billy Wiles is back. He didn't inspire a lot of confidence necessarily last year, but if there is improvement there, Southern Miss might not go 3-9 this upcoming year.
That's an important note for me too. If you watch the Sun Belt, it might not be the prettiest football, but there's some gems in the rough over there. In 2023, we saw a 14% increase in NFL roster representation out of the Sun Belt Conference. And just in the past couple of years, there's been some notable guys like Isaiah Likely. There's a lot of good kickers out of the Sun Belt Conference. So if you're looking for talent, definitely watch the Sun Belt Conference. But the actual play might be a little sloppy, but it's definitely something you have to consider.
Also, sometimes they have some primetime games on like Tuesdays, and well, maybe not Tuesdays the entire time, but they do have a lot of Thursday games as well. So the Sunbelt Fun Belt is still going
When you need
strong.
your little football fix when you're on a Thursday, can't wait till Saturday. It's the best thing in the world.
I'm a big fan of midweek football because I'm just a big fan of football being on my TV in general. So let's touch on Coastal Carolina.
Yeah.
Do you like to touch on Coastal a little bit? I know it's year 2 for Tim Beck. Their former coach Jamie Chadwell moved on to coach for Liberty, and he led them to a great season last year. Tim Beck had a solid year.
Yeah. Grayson McCall, their quarterback last year, is going to transfer out of the conference. He had a great year last year. Unfortunately, cut short due to injury. He would have been my offensive player of the year, but I'm sure whoever they have fill his void is going to be perfect.
Yeah. So Grayson McCall, he had a fantastic career at Coastal Carolina, sort of embodied what the Chanticleers are all about. He transfers to North Carolina State. Another one of their quarterbacks, Jared Guest, transfers out and actually transfers here to Bryan. That leaves sort of one incumbent quarterback, and then they brought in another quarterback from the transfer portal. So it'll be Ethan Vasco, who was the incumbent. He started in the bowl game last year, the bowl game victory over San Jose State in the Hawaii Bowl. And Noah Kim, who transferred over from Michigan State. They were 8-5 last year, but they will have a little bit of a different looking receiver core. Jared Brown transferred out, and so did Tyson Mobley. So you'll see a little bit of a difference in wide receiver, but I still think that Coastal Carolina has a very talented team. Both of those quarterbacks can absolutely perform well in the Sun Belt, and Tim Beck's scheme was pretty solid as well last year. So playing on that teal field, I think Coastal Carolina might have a good shot at making a good run there. And then we have 2 more teams before we finish off. I'll touch on South Alabama really quickly. So it's year 1 for Major Applewhite, which is a very fun name to say. He was a former Texas quarterback, started coaching. He was the offensive coordinator there last year. They will have a different defensive coordinator. Their defensive coordinator last year, Corey Batoon, left also to Missouri. So a lot of pieces from the Sun Belt heading to the new look Missouri Tigers. 7-6 last year for South Alabama. You still have Gio Lopez returning back at quarterback, Kentrell Bullock back at running back. They should be relatively stagnant of a team. I don't expect them to be much better, but I also don't expect them to be much worse either. And then finally, Texas State. They had just a remarkable turnaround last year. Texas State historically, ever since they joined the FBS, had been a sort of bottom feeder team in the Sun Belt. They just didn't really have the people to compete. In comes G.J. Kinney, who was the coach of Incarnate Word the previous year. He comes in, goes 8-5 with Texas State, gets them their first ever FBS bowl game win. Now, during a lot of the preview process, Texas State was in a bit of a quarterback problem. Every single quarterback on their roster had transferred out. And this is partially because they brought someone in via transfer that really upset the quarterback room.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing with the transfer portal. When you transfer a guy in, you have a guy that's been sitting in your program for 3-4 years looking for their opportunity. It kind of seems like it's a shade towards them. Like, am I not good enough?
Yeah, so they brought in Jaden DeLora from Arizona. Now, DeLora has some allegations. I'm not going to discuss them here on the show. You can feel free to do a quick Google search, and you can find out what happened in high school, some claims of sexual assault. So bringing in DeLora to the program really upset TJ Finley, who was the starter last year. He transferred over to Western Kentucky. It upset Malik Hornsby. He transfers in conference to Arkansas State. And even their like third string, fourth string quarterbacks transfer out. So, it seems like, okay, Jaden DeLora is going to be the guy, whether you like it or not. But there's a huge backlash from Texas State fans and other players in the program. They finally say, okay, Jaden, get out of here. So he declares for the NFL draft. So that left them sort of searching, scanning without a quarterback. And who do they bring in to replace him? But another in-conference transfer coming over from James Madison, Jordan McLeod, coming in to fill the role. That just happened yesterday from when we filmed this. So the 27th of February is when that news broke that McLeod would be coming over to Texas State. So Texas State going to be a pretty solid team next year. All right. So that concludes the preview portion. Let's get into some of the predictions. So we're going to start off with the East, the Sunbelt East, and then we will get into the Sunbelt West after that. So first things first, starting off with the Sunbelt East, we have Appalachian State. Now, they start off the season, we're going to break it down. Going to start off with the non-conference, then the home slate, then the away slate. This is because the Sun Belt has not officially released their schedule for next year yet. They do have all the teams that they're playing, just not, which week they're playing in. So to sort of get around that, this is what I had to do. If you have any complaints about that, feel free to drop that in the comment section below, or DM me over at Zeke-ollege Football on Instagram. That is ZEKE.OLLEGEFOOTBALL on Instagram.
Or to avoid that, because Zeke is such a great host here at Bryant, you could go straight to the Sunbelt Conference for them not releasing their week-by-week schedule.
Yeah, you could also do that too.
But good luck with that one.
Yeah, good luck trying to get that one through all the bureaucracy. Anyway, Appalachian State, they're going to start off their non-conference slate against East Tennessee State. It's an FCS team. I see App State winning that one. Then they travel at Clemson. I think that's going to be a loss. Cade Klubnik's still there. Clemson's a very talented team. Sorry, App State. I think that's a loss there. I think they beat East Carolina, and I think they beat Liberty, giving Liberty their sole loss on the season. Now, in the actual home slate for App State, I see them beating Georgia State. I see them beating James Madison at home at Kidd Brewer Stadium. I see them beating Old Dominion and beating South Alabama. Now, for the away slate, I see them losing to Coastal Carolina on the teal field. I see them beating Georgia Southern, beating Louisiana, and beating Marshall to finish with a 10-2 record, 7-1 in conference. Now, for Coastal Carolina, Chris?
Yeah, Coastal Carolina starts off the season at Jacksonville State. It's going to be a hot one. Great start to the football weather. I see them coming away with a win there. Then we have William and Mary, another school that not a lot of people have heard of.
Yeah, that's an FCS school. They play in the CAA, but I don't know. I think that Coastal Carolina will probably get the win over.
Handles that one. At Temple, I see a win there. At Ole Miss puts up a lot.
Well, actually, so they Coastal Carolina is going to be playing Virginia.
I'm sorry, I beg my pardon.
But they're playing Virginia at Scott Stadium, so at Virginia's field. And I think that with Anthony Calandria still back there, he was a freshman last year, really gave Virginia a spark. I think that they will be able to take Coastal Carolina. They just have a little bit more manpower than Coastal does. And then for the home slate, I see Appalachian State at home. I see Coastal winning that. We already covered that part. Winning against Old Dominion, winning against Georgia Southern, winning against Louisiana. I see them for the away slate beating Georgia State before losing to James Madison, then beating Marshall and beating a Gunnar Watson-less Troy.
That's nothing against Coastal Carolina, in my opinion, on that James Madison loss. I feel like James Madison is going to be one of those teams that you don't want to see at home this year.
Exactly. It's one of those. It's one of those things where, when I was doing the predictions, like the actual going through the schedules week by week, which games do I think they're going to win? Which games do I think they're going to lose? I see 3 teams in the Sunbelt East that are going to be all at the top of their conference, and every single game between one of those teams, I think, could go either way. I think they're very, very close in talent level between App State, Coastal Carolina, and James Madison. I think those are the 3 teams that are really going to be competing for the Sunbelt East title this year. But I saw Coastal Carolina going 10-2, 7-1 in conference as well. Now for Georgia Southern, they start off hosting Boise State. Boise State, a talented team coming out of the Mountain West. I don't see them coming away with a victory there. I see them losing at Nevada as well. Nevada picked up some talented players in the portal, and they picked up Chuba Purdy, Brock Purdy's younger brother, coming over from Nebraska. He actually did solid in the Nebraska offense, so I think that he was a good get for Nevada, and I think that Nevada will be able to beat Georgia Southern here. South Carolina State FCS team, and HBCU as well. I see Georgia Southern getting the victory there before a loss at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
Now for the home slate,
for Georgia Southern. Yeah. So, all right.
Yeah, Georgia Southern.
So, home to James Madison.
Yeah, I see them actually like beating. It's one of those things where there's always going to be like 1 or 2 games that
surprise you.
Right? You can't just pick the favorite in every single thing because it's every given Saturday. And I think Georgia Southern has the talent where they might be able to take a game off of James Madison, especially given the fact that they're playing a home game, James Madison having to travel on the road there. I see them losing to Appalachian State, though. See them losing to Troy. and beating Marshall. So they go 2-2 during their home slate there.
Yeah.
And then on the road, I see them losing at Coastal Carolina, but they beat Georgia State. In their rivalry game, they beat Old Dominion, and I think they beat South Alabama. They're going 6-6, 5-3 in conference.
Not bad.
That's not too shabby at all. And now we get to Georgia State. I like Georgia State. I do. I think that the team will be a little demoralized, though. You know, a lot of talent sort of transferred out. You lose your leading rusher. You lose your head coach to a position coach job at a Power 5 university. I don't know how you
it's hard to read.
I was going to say, as a football player, I don't know how you see that and take it as anything other than a slight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're leaving being our head coach.
Yeah.
Just to, not even a coordinator job.
Yeah.
A position coach job? Like that's disrespectful.
A lost puzzle piece down in that organization.
Yeah, I that's just straight up disrespectful. And I think it'll take a little while for Georgia State to sort of recover from that and gel with their new coach. Again, no slight against Del McGee whatsoever. I just think it takes a little bit to gel with a new coach in general,
right?
Especially when there isn't that same sort of consistency at a lot of major positions. I see them losing at Georgia Tech. I see them beating Chattanooga. I see them losing to Vanderbilt and losing at UConn as well before they get into their conference slate. I see them losing to Coastal Carolina, losing to Georgia Southern, losing to Old Dominion, losing to Arkansas State. I see them losing to App State, losing to James Madison. I think they beat Marshall on the road, and I think they lose to Texas State. So a 2-10 record with 1-7 in conference. But that's not to say that this team isn't talented. I think this team is still talented. They also just got probably one of the tougher schedules in the entirety of the Sunbelt. You're playing in the East, so you have to face James Madison, you have to face App State, you have to face Coastal Carolina. And on top of that, coming out of the West, the two teams that you get are Texas State and Arkansas State. I think Texas State's going to be one of the big contenders in the Sunbelt West, and Arkansas State's no slouch as well. So, really just a tough opportunity.
On top of a tough schedule, most of them are all on the road too, so you don't even have the comfort of your home fans getting behind you. You're kind of like thrown into the rough there.
Exactly. It's unfortunate, but someone has to lose these games, and I think that they'll be relatively close games, especially the ones against Old Dominion, Arkansas State, Georgia Southern. But I don't see Georgia State really coming up with a victory here against most of those teams. Now, James Madison, if you look over.
Yeah, James Madison is definitely a team that I'm super excited for because of Bob Chesney. I'm a big believer in this guy. I feel like he's going to translate to an NFL coach down the road. So they start off the season at Charlotte, of course, not in order, but at Charlotte, a W. Gardner-Webb, another W. At North Carolina, that's a tough game.
It is a tough game. They're without Drake May. He obviously went to the NFL draft. We'll cover that in a couple weeks for our draft preview show. But they do have Max Johnson coming in over there. North Carolina, still a talented team. Still have Omari and Hampton at running back. So I love James Madison. I think they might lose that one.
Yeah. And then after that one, we did a run of wins here. So at Ball State, or home to Ball State, win. Home to Coastal Carolina, W. Home to Georgia State, that's going to be a win. Home to Marshall, win. Home to Southern Miss, another victory. And then road games.
I think at least for the road slate, a fairly they have two tough road games. I think they lose at App State. I think they lose at Georgia Southern, but I think they beat Old Dominion on the road, and I think they beat ULM on the road as well, finishing 9-3 and 6-2 in conference.
And with a first-year head coach, I would take that.
I was gonna say
3.
Yeah, 9-3 with a first year head coach,
Yeah.
especially in a Sun Belt, which does have a lot of talented teams. Next up, we have Marshall. First things first, they start off the season home to Stony Brook. I think they win that one. I think they lose to Virginia Tech. Kyron Drones back at quarterback for Virginia Tech. He's a solid player, and I think I like the way that Virginia Tech is running their program out in Blacksburg. I think they beat Western Michigan, but they're going to lose to Ohio State. I don't think that's. I don't think
You
that's.
don't have to explain yourself on that one.
Okay. And then for their home slate, I think they lose to Appalachian State. They lose to Coastal Carolina. I say they lose to Georgia State as well. Again, one of those games where it's really like it could go either way, but I think Georgia State gets the victory there. And I think they beat ULM. And then for their away slate, I think they lose to Georgia Southern, lose to James Madison on the road, lose to Old Dominion on the road. But I think they beat Southern Miss on the road. So ending up 4-8, 2-6 in conference. So not a step back for Marshall, but you do see sort of difficulties to keep up the momentum, right? I think they have a little bit of a tougher slate this year with teams in the Sun Belt improving. Yes, they had some stability. That being said, I don't think it was enough. I don't think Mitch Griffiths or Cole Pennington really have that sort of it factor to carry them to victories. So 4-8, 2-6, not the best, but not the worst either.
What's tough for them is being in the East. I mean, the East, I feel like is one of those conferences that the division of the conference is more loaded than the West.
Yeah.
So it makes it much more difficult to climb to the top.
It's a murderer's row. It's like when you look at how Mississippi State does, right? They play in the SEC West, historically very tough. They have to play against LSU, they have to play against Texas A&M, they have to play against Alabama, Auburn. You have to play against a lot of these like amazing teams. So when you look at a team like Mississippi State, which is still a solid team, when they're playing against like fantastic opponents, you're like, oh, okay, maybe the record doesn't indicate how the talent of the team.
It's seen a lot in the Big Ten as well with the East and West. Michigan always represented.
Poor Maryland.
Yeah.
Poor Maryland.
Yeah, Michigan and Ohio State both on the same side.
Same with Penn State
in
too.
The championship game. Luckily, this year we're going to see that because they're going away with the divisions there.
Divisionless.
But out of the West and the Big Ten, you see teams like Iowa and Purdue in the Big Ten championship game, and it's
just a blowout.
You just know what you're going into.
So, Old Dominion coming up next. They start off the season at South Carolina. I think that's a loss. Hosting East Carolina, I think that's a loss. I think they lose to Virginia Tech as well, but I do think they beat Bowling Green. For their home slate, loss at Georgia Southern, or loss against Georgia Southern, loss against James Madison, loss against Texas State. I think they beat Marshall. And then for their away slate, at App State, I think that's a loss. I think they win on the road at Arkansas State. At Coastal Carolina, I think that's a loss. And then at Georgia State, I think they get the victory there. So 4-8, 3-5 in conference for them. So now we get into the Sunbelt West. We covered how the East is a murderer's row. The West, no slacker either. Start off with Arkansas State here.
Yeah, Arkansas State starts off the season at home against Central Arkansas. See that as a win. And then at Michigan, another not needing
that's
a loss. At Iowa State, also tough program. Sadly, a loss. Home to Tulsa. I see a close game there, but a win. South Alabama, loss. Troy, loss. ULM, victory. I don't see too many teams losing at ULM this year. Lost to Old Dominion, at Georgia State, win. At Louisiana, victory. And at Southern Miss, victory. And then at Texas State, loss.
So yeah, we see them going 6-6 with 4-4 in conference. Nothing to sneeze at there for Butch Jones in this Arkansas State program. I think they have a solid team, good quarterbacks on the roster. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be bowl eligible. That being said, will they be able to win a bowl game? Depends on who they're matched up with.
Yeah, that's like the exact same recipe as last year.
Exactly.
Going 4-4 in the conference, 6-6 overall, going to a bowl game and figuring out what your team's made of from there.
I was gonna say, I think it's just about that sort of consistency. Butch Jones brings a certain consistency to this Arkansas State program, but when will it be, enough, right?
I think it's important to note that winning over 6 games in the NCAA, it's nothing to laugh at.
No.
Get into a bowl game. There's a lot of teams that can't even win 6 games. Like going into all the bowl games last year, there was a lot of teams that didn't have enough wins for 6, and there was some 5-win teams in there.
Yeah, teams they had to waive, provide a waiver for James Madison, provide a waiver for Jacksonville State as well. So, nothing to sneeze at getting to 6 wins, but we'll see if Butch Jones can get over the hump there. Now, the University of Louisiana, the Ragin' Cajuns, one of my personal favorite team nicknames. I see them they start off the season in their non-conference slate against Grambling State. I think they win that one. I think they win on the road at Kennesaw State. Loss to Tulane at home and a loss to Wake Forest. In their conference slate, I think they lose to Arkansas State at home. I think they beat South Alabama, lose to Troy, and lose to App State at home. And then on the road, I think they lose at Coastal Carolina, beat Southern Miss, lose at Texas State, and beat ULM. So 5-7, 3-5 in conference. But talking about tough schedules, my goodness. I mean, Louisiana has a very, very tough schedule.
Right.
Especially in their conference slate.
Yeah.
Not only are you facing Troy and Texas State, the 2 top teams, in my eyes, out of the Sunbelt West, but coming over from the East, the 2 teams you get are App State and Coastal Carolina.
Yeah.
Brutal. So 5-7, 3-5 in conference. If they can maybe steal a game off of Arkansas State, maybe, then they could be bowl eligible, and Ark State would not be. But it's tough. It's a very tough schedule for them. Now, would you like to go over Louisiana Monroe?
Yeah. It seems like that's a trend for Louisiana, getting tough games this year.
Yeah.
So they're going to start off the season, Jackson State with a W. UAB loss at Texas and then at Auburn. 2 back-to-back games that are outside of the conference that you just jump out at you.
I was going to say, now, I think the Auburn game is scheduled for right before rivalry week.
Right.
So I think it's week 13 for the Louisiana Monroe versus Auburn game.
Regardless of the
but even still, tough game. I think that's a loss.
Yeah. And then going down the list, Louisiana home, it's the loss. Southern Miss, Texas State, James Madison, at Arkansas State. Just go all the way down the list. It's going to be losses.
Yeah, I see them going 1-11, their sole victory coming over Jackson State, and I see them going 0-8 in conference.
Much like last year.
Just barely worse than last year. They went 0-8 in conference last year.
2-10.
But 2-10 with their only other victory coming over Army. But they don't play Army this year. So Tough for Louisiana Monroe. Now for South Alabama, I see them beating North Texas, losing at Ohio. Ohio, one of the better teams in the MAC. See them losing to Northwestern and losing to LSU. I see them losing to Troy, beating Texas State in a shocker. I think they're like one of the few teams that really like matches up well with Texas State. I see them beating ULM, losing to Georgia Southern, losing to Appalachian State on the road. At Arkansas State, I see them picking up a win there. At Louisiana, that's a loss. And then I see them picking up a win at Southern Miss.
The toughest thing with all these teams is it's obviously a gauntlet in the Sunbelt Conference, but when you're going out and you're playing a Big Ten team, you're playing Texas, Auburn, any of those teams, you're going to struggle.
Yeah,
it's almost an automatic loss on the sheet.
Almost. You still see sometimes what happened last year with New Mexico State beating Auburn at Jordan Hare.
Trust me, for all you college basketball fans out there, I'm a big Purdue fan, and I know all about good teams losing to bad teams in late March.
But moving forward, Southern Miss, I don't see them having a very good year either. At Kentucky, I think that's a loss. Southeastern, that's a victory. Losses at USF and at Jacksonville State. Loss against Arkansas State, against South Alabama, against Marshall and Louisiana. So I don't see them getting a single win during their home slate or home conference slate. And then on the road, at James Madison, loss. At Texas State, loss. At Troy, loss. Before getting their sole conference victory at ULM. So I see them going 2-10, 1-7 in conference. Now for Texas State, they're going to start off the season against Lamar. It's an FCS team. I think they win that one. I see them losing to UTSA. I see them losing to Arizona State. And then they play a neutral siter against Sam Houston. I think they win that one. I think they win at home against Arkansas State, win at home against Louisiana, win at home against Southern Miss, and win at home against Georgia State. I see them beating Old Dominion on the road. I see them losing to South Alabama on the road, beating Troy on the road, and beating ULM, going 9-3, 7-1 in conference.
Improvement from last year. That's what you want to see.
Because I really like Jordan McLeod as their quarterback. I like the way that G.J. Kinney is building this program. And I think, seeing that success at Texas State, he's able to get a little bit more talent coming in than he had last year. And then finishing off with Troy, I see them winning against Nevada, losing on the road at Memphis, losing on the road at Iowa, beating the Rattlers of Florida A&M, and then beating Southern Miss at home, losing to Texas State, beating ULM at home, losing to Coastal Carolina, and then going on the road and beating Arkansas State, beating Louisiana, beating Georgia Southern, and beating South Alabama. So going 8-4 in total, 6-2 in conference.
Yeah.
So those are the predictions that we have for the Sun Belt. But really quickly, I want to touch on some major news that is coming out of the MAC. We did the MAC preview last week, but a breaking news story just broke yesterday, so I want to talk about it a little bit. In the 2025-2026 academic year, the MAC will actually be adding a new school to their ranks. One of the few independent schools that was left, the MAC will be adding the UMass Minutemen. Chris, do you have any thoughts on the MAC adding UMass there?
I think it's huge for the conference. Anytime you add a team into a conference, it brings news to your program, it brings the attention, and I feel like it's just going to make the MAC even harder about with a victory.
I think this is a good move really for both sides, right? UMass, when they first transitioned into the FBS, they were a part of the MAC. Then they left, became an FBS independent. But if you're the MAC, this brings you, more of a national limelight, right? Now, viewers in the Northeast will start to view your product more than they were. And then for UMass, the MAC is one of those conferences where they have teams where UMass is able to actually compete against. When UMass is scheduling games at Penn State, at Notre Dame, it's a little tough to.
It's also a lot less work for the program, reaching out, seeing if a school wants to play them. And also with those bigger schools, it's always at their home, never at UMass. So being in the conference and getting a lot of home games, that's beneficial for sure.
Absolutely. So that's going to happen in the 2025-2026 academic year. But more importantly, that's going to leave only 2 independent teams left in all of D1 college football. There's no FCS independents anymore. And right now, the only independents for the FBS will be Notre Dame and UConn. So that is all we have prepared for you today. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 3 of Zeke-ollege Football, the Sunbelt Fun Belt preview. And thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a good time.
I appreciate it. And if you'd ever like to come back onto the show,
absolutely,
just let me know and we will schedule that. So that will be it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Feel free to leave a comment in the description below if you feel so inclined. Go drop a follow over at Zeke.ollege Football on Instagram. That is Zeke.OLLEGEFOOTBALL. You can see my spelling bee talents did not translate over there. Also, feel free to follow Chris at Chris Cooke Jr. 18 on Instagram as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.